I think it's the right decision to put the AstraZeneca vaccines on hold for the time being, until we have enough medical reasoning for continuing the vaccinations. Of course, I'm as upset as everyone else about this and the potential consequences, but it's probably too soon to conclude on this matter. When there's a risk, of course it has to be uncovered.
Well, Professor Lawrence Young is from the University of Warwick in England, where he co-leads the Health Global Research Priorities Programme. He's internationally recognised for his work in virus infection, and I asked him if Denmark was right to suspend the use of this vaccine.
Well, I think where you find any serious adverse events to any medicine, then it is beholden on the regulators to stop the use of that medicine or vaccine and do a full investigation. So it's right to just have a look at what's going on.
And has a connection between these blood clots and the use of the vaccine been determined?
No, and one of the problems, of course, is that as you roll out a vaccine across millions of people, you're going to see effects because that's what happens in the general population anyway. In the UK, more than 11 million doses of the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine have been administered, and there's not been any reports of excess blood clots amongst those receiving the vaccine compared with the expected rate of blood clots in the normal general population.
Right. The AstraZeneca vaccine has been dogged by rumours about its safety and efficacy. Why is that?
I honestly don't know, because if you look at the data that's been published all the way through the development of the vaccine, and I have to say the group have been very transparent, all the data's looked fine. Early on, there was data demonstrating that the immune response was just as effective in those individuals over 70 as below 70. So aside from a political issue, I've got no idea that it's a very, very good vaccine.
Meanwhile, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine has just received approval from the EMA. This sounds like good news. How do you think this American company can now avoid the sort of production problems that have so beset AstraZeneca in Europe?
I think this is the biggest single problem in a way. We've raced into the development and testing of these vaccines, but I think we knew that because these are biological vaccines, manufacture was always going to be a bottleneck. So the hope is that Johnson & Johnson can scale up their manufacturing capacity as quickly as possible, but they also have a vaccine that only requires one jab and can be stored for up to 3 months in a refrigerator. So it's going to make life a lot more easier in terms of the rollout of vaccination and the fact that you don't have to give 2 jabs.
And are there still more to come? I think that's 3 or 4 that Europe has now given the green light to. Are there still more in the pipeline?
There certainly are. I mean, there are different platforms, of course. The Novavax vaccine has been very successful, which is a subunit protein vaccine. And of course, there are the RNA vaccines, which we know have also been very successful, including the Pfizer-BioNTech as well as Moderna. And in fact, those RNA vaccines are now being modified to account for some of the more difficult infectious variants that we've seen arising in South Africa and in Brazil. So I think there are a lot more of these. They're all more or less effective to the same degree. I think the unique thing with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is that you just need a single jab.
Well, this all sounds like great news. Thanks very much for joining us, Professor. Professor Lawrence Young from the University of Warwick. Let's get more on this from Professor Polly Roy, who's a virologist at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Welcome to DW. Does this Johnson & Johnson vaccine have any particular advantages over the ones that are already out there?
Well, the particular advantages of Johnson & Johnson is the single dose, of course, and also it has the temperature that it doesn't require very cold like RNA viruses require, RNA vaccines are required. So it is, refrigerator temperature, so very easy to roll out. And that's the major thing. I think the most important is a single dose is giving enough protection. And that's the advantages. Of course, I believe the other adenovirus based vaccine of COVID-19, such as AstraZeneca, will do the same. Of course, they did not test it yet. So Johnson & Johnson have done a single dose, and that's what the major importance, I think, about significance of this vaccine.
Right. So here in Europe, the EU has been criticised for its slow rollout of vaccine. So I guess something like this, one shot and more vaccine around anyway, that's going to help speed up the process significantly.
Absolutely. I think that is one of the problems that we had. If you make a lot of vaccine, if you make vaccine, but you cannot really, manufacturing situation is not that good, or the rollout is difficult, that's the problem. That is the problem always for vaccine. So it looks like Johnson & Johnson worked out that already, and several other vaccines now. I think that we are in a very good position now. And I think that Europe should not have any more difficulties to get access to some of this vaccine and control the disease.
And how far is the sort of production lag between approval and actually getting these vaccines out of the door? Because one of the problems that Europe has had, of course, has been they've got all these people waiting for the vaccines, and then various suppliers are saying, well, we can't actually produce enough. Is that likely to be a problem with Johnson & Johnson?
Well, for all vaccines, it's the same problem. But Johnson & Johnson now have two different companies are going to produce that. One produce and one are going to actually manufacture both of them. And I think that will help to produce many more doses. And that's what the US is talking about. I mean, we are the scientists. We make the vaccines. But the manufacturing is the different companies and different capacity they need. So so many doses we need, and that is the problem. But I think they are working out and are fine the way they're designing now.
Now, this news comes as we hear that Denmark and Norway and Iceland have suspended their use of AstraZeneca's vaccine after some patients developed blood clots. Do you think that's justified? No,
not really, because that's not probably due to the vaccine itself. Maybe they have some underlying problem, There's no difference in a way for AstraZeneca's adenovirus-based vaccine versus Johnson & Johnson or Sputnik V vaccine. So I think that all adenoviruses are the one they use as a vector are quite safe. There's no problem about that, and already is approved. Millions are given in England, so there is no difference between other people's and in England. So I don't think there's any problem. I think they have other problems. That's the main issues.
Good talking to you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor. Professor Polly Roy from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine.
Thank you.
Now, today marks a year since the World Health Organization declared a COVID-19 pandemic. The first coronavirus cases appeared in the Chinese city of Wuhan. Officials there identified a seafood market as the source of the outbreak. The virus quickly spread across the world, with Europe becoming the new epicenter. Lockdowns and border closures didn't stop it moving, and before long, almost every part of the world was affected. So how are countries around the world coping a year on? Well, we asked our correspondents in Israel, South Africa and India.
1 year on, Israel is one of the leading nations when it comes to vaccination campaigns against COVID-19. Over 50% of Israelis have received at least one dose of the vaccine. But health officials are still concerned about the new variants. And with over 5,900 people losing their lives to COVID-19 in this past year, the government has often been harshly criticized for mishandling the crisis. But after 3 hard lockdowns, people are now looking forward to going back to some kind of normality.
Despite the problems and the economic hardship, people here are trying to remain optimistic, and there are reasons for that. The second wave was not as bad as predicted, especially considering the new mutation of the virus that was discovered here in South Africa for the first time. Also, vaccination programs have started, and epidemiologists believe that up to 40% of the population contracted COVID before, which gives some hope for the next waves to come.
A year ago, India was just beginning to talk about the coronavirus, and many of the people we spoke to were skeptical about just how serious it is. Over the next year, India experienced one of the strictest lockdowns in the world and a highest ever caseload of close to 100,000 daily cases. Now, however, average cases every day are under 20,000 and the vaccination drive is in full swing. With markets, airports and even some offices almost returning to normal, many are once again wondering just how seriously they still need to take the coronavirus.